Ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, Professor Bubbles is proud to present P.T. Barnum's exhibition of curiosities.
Hello and welcome to another video from P.T. Barnum's exhibition of curiosities. Today we have a special one for you. This is the last chapter, and this is a book that was written by Nancy Fish Barnum, who was P.T. Barnum's second wife. They were married in 1874, just 3 months after the death of his first wife, Charity Barnum. This book's very special because it lets you find out what Barnum was doing in the last few years of his life. His own autobiography was very, very popular, and this is really just a follow-up to tell you what happens near the end. This is a very special book for me, and the reason why is because this book was made in a limited edition. It was only given to friends and family of P.T. Barnum when Nancy did write it. There is a couple that I have seen before. One is in the P.T. Barnum Museum, which is in Bridgeport, Connecticut. That's number 36. They were actually all numbered as well. There's one in the Historical Library, just off Central Park in New York, and that is number 23. The good thing about this, it did come from Nancy's collection, and this is actually number 1. Okay, so hopefully you're going to enjoy it. What we have done for you, we have now changed it into an audiobook, which means straight after we do this, you can listen to the whole book. The book only lasts, it's only got 19 pages, and lasts for about 22 minutes. Please do us one wee favour. If you do like this channel and you want to learn more about P.T. Barnum and curious subjects, then just subscribe. So just press the like button, you'll find out when we're coming on. And if you subscribe to the channel, you'll get lots more things. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. What we have done is on the audiobook, I have put some pictures, and these pictures to relate to memorabilia that I do have of Nancy Fish Barnum. Okay, so enjoy the audiobook, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
The last chapter. The winter of 1889 to 1890 saw the gratification of one of Mr. Barnum's greatest and longest cherished ambitions. He took the greatest show on earth to London, where in the great amusement building called Olympia, perhaps the largest in the world, it at once became the fashion, a great and social financial success. Royalty went, attended with all due ceremony, and went again, and yet again. Incognito, it became a rendezvous for the nobility, the favorite resort of the great middle class, and the Mecca of the poor. The public, charmed and dazzled by the brilliant spectacle, were eager to see its author and proprietor. Royalty greeted him cordially, the Prince of Wales saying, "We are old friends and need no introduction," and cast aside the formalities which hedged them in from their own subjects. At the other end of the social gamut, the little street Arabs clamored affectionately for "Good old Barnum," an appellation which, heard everywhere in the streets, made his heart and face glow. Mr. Barnum attended nearly every performance, driving twice daily many miles for the purpose, and keeping for him unusually late hours. Often wearied with excitement and the unwanted irregularity, his genuine pleasure and gratified pride made him unwilling to admit, even to himself, any weariness or discomfort indicating an increase of the heart weakness, the existence of which had been known to us both for some years. When he returned to America in March, circumstances detained me, much against my will, in London, and thus I lost 3 months of his companionship, out of what we both of us little knew was to be the last year of his life. When I returned in June, it seemed to me as if the kindly face which smiled up at me over a big bouquet, as I looked down on the wharf from the deck of the Britannic, had a pallor it did not wear when last we parted. But in the joy of having his home circle once more complete, he seemed more than ever light-hearted and gay and active. The summer sped by with its usual swiftness. in the enjoyment of simple home pleasures, which included all his family, children, grandchildren, and the great-grandchildren, who were his chief joy and pride. On July 4th, 1890, we celebrated his 80th birthday, which really fell on the 5th by his usual assembling around our table of all the family. He seemed on this day unusually anxious that none should be missing, unusually tender to everyone present, child, grandchild, and great-grandchild. On this day, he gave a dinner to all his employees and their families, going to them later from his family gathering and addressing them a short speech of much feeling and earnestness. Many of those present had served him 20, and some even 30 years. With moist eyes and a voice that now faltered with emotion and again rang with earnestness, he reviewed the years of their association, thanking them for their fidelity and giving them, with paternal tenderness, good counsel for the future conduct of their lives. It was as if he had some prescience that it was for the last time. Again, as if with some foreboding that it was his last birthday, he gave me a copy of his life, in which he wrote the date, adding, "With love forevermore." August we spent, according to custom, at Paul Smith's, and after another month at our beautiful home, Marina, we set out for Colorado, in fulfillment of his great desire to show me the West, and to pay a long-promised visit to his daughter, the wife of Dr. Buchtel of Denver. We stopped en route a few days at Chicago and Kansas City, where we saw the show for the last time. The warm-hearted Western people who, in Kansas City, gave us such a delightful informal reception and made our 2-week stay in Denver one unbroken round of pleasure. We'll never forget the hale, hearty, handsome old man, the incarnation of vigor and hilarity, who received every stranger as an old friend and greeted every former acquaintance with some allusion which showed a flattering clearness of recollection of their last meeting. Sir Edwin Arnold says in his preface to Japonica, "It is much if any man can register, amid the vicissitudes of time, one whole annus delectabilis, with none but delightful experiences and agreeable memories. It is much to be able to record 1 month of pleasure without alloy, and I can say of October 1890 that it was, for 2 people at least, a month of flawless happiness. Never so," Mr. Barnum said, "did he enjoy a journey so much as this, which we little dreamed was to be his last. Never had nature seemed to him so beautiful. He entered with boyish eagerness into every excursion, regardless of all entreaties to be careful, regardless of all cautions as to the possible ill effects of such an altitude. He was perfectly and exuberantly happy, thinking all the world fair and all mankind true. No less happy was the coming home, rich in pleasant memories to Marina and our own folks. Coming events do not always cast their shadows before, and when, on November 6th, he was unusually drowsy and listless after his customary afternoon nap, it did not seem as if it could be the beginning of the end. But in the next 3 days, he developed acute congestion of the brain. By dint of great care and his good constitution, this danger was safely passed in 3 weeks, and he seemed then on the way to recovering his usual robust health. But the insidious heart weakness had in the meantime made decided progress, and the verdict of the physician was, "The end may not be near, but this is his last sickness." To this they added strictest cautions that the truth must be kept from the patient, as it might produce depression, and depression would quickly cause death. All excitement and fatigue were forbidden. Then began the cruel strain on those who loved him, and who, knowing the inevitable end, must yet enter into all his plans for the future. And while mourning the fading of the precious life, were obliged to answer cheerfully when he said, as he did so often, "Now I feel that I am really getting well," mercifully suffering scarcely at all. He was always cheerful, often merry. His room was the one bright spot in a sad house, and his hearty laugh was often heard. Each day, up to the last day he lived, he was dressed and spent several hours in the sunny bay window of his room, from which he could see the park, beyond that the Sound, and still beyond the faint line of Long Island. Keeping his hold on all his business affairs, he exercised his usual shrewdness and direction then, carrying out transactions involving hundreds of thousands of dollars. One of these was the erection of a block of business buildings. The name, fame, and interest of the greatest show on earth were near to his heart as ever, and he worked hard, alone and in collaboration with Mr. Bailey, to secure new features and superior general excellence for the season of 1891. His hearty cooperation was a great help and comfort to Mr. Bailey, who hoped against hope that his old friend and partner would be spared yet many years. An inimitable storyteller, he was eager as ever to procure a good story, and was then boyishly impatient to relate it. Among his most appreciative listeners was his friend and lawyer, Mr. Curtis Thompson, for whom, having got a new and good anecdote, he would send at once, and, as he entered the room, greet him with a jovial, "Well, Curtis, I don't want you on business, but I will pay you just the same. I have heard such a good story," etc., etc. Then followed roars of laughter, and it was hard to realize that the loudest and heartiest was that of a dying man. Determined to live, he was docile in following the doctor's injunctions, and bore with unwavering patience a confinement that must have been very irksome to a man of such active habits. But he never murmured. Generous as ever and sensitive to the sufferings of others, he signalized every holiday by remembering, out of his abundance, institutions and individuals in need. At Thanksgiving, he presented a parsonage to the Church of the Redeemer, of which he had been a member, and very largely a supporter for many years. At Christmas, he gave generously to the poor and sick, the widowed and orphans. In the name of his beloved great-grandchildren, he sent toys to the less fortunate little ones of the poor. To every society working for the good and comfort of the people of Bridgeport, he sent liberal subscriptions. At this time, he matured his plan of providing a permanent home for the Bridgeport Scientific, Historical, and Medical Societies. On March 16, 1891, he signed the contract for the handsome brownstone building on the corner of Main and Gilbert Streets, one of the chief ornaments of Bridgeport, and quite worthy of the generous donor. The genuine love and anxiety of the American people for the man who had contributed so largely to their pleasure became a menace to the patient. The public demanded to know his condition, and as weeks wore into months, reporters were unsatisfied with non-committal bulletins. As Mr. Barnum rarely missed a day reading his beloved New York Tribune and the Bridgeport papers, looking always for the report of his condition, it became a very serious matter that was printed concerning him. The consideration shown by the press when the situation was explained will always be gratefully remembered by the writer. I do not think that until the last 2 weeks of his sickness, Mr. Barnum gave up his hope of getting well. There was nothing to show when he gave up clinging to the life he so much enjoyed and loved so well. Of his own death he would not speak. Of death in the abstract, he said, "It is a good thing, a beautiful thing, just as much so as life. And it is wrong to grieve about it, and to look on it as an evil." But there came into his eyes a great wistfulness whenever he looked on a loved face, and he busied himself more than ever, but all for the comfort of others when he should be gone. Often he mused silently for hours, with a calm, intent gaze that seemed to see beyond the present, and at night his last half-whispered words were, "Thy will be done." Sometimes stronger, sometimes weaker, but rarely helpless, and still more rarely depressed, it would not have been possible to believe him dying, but for the assurance of his devoted physicians, Doctors Hubbard and Godfrey, that the heart which had beaten so bravely for 80 years was becoming more and more weary. For the assiduous and tender care which watched him untiringly and lightened as much as possible the suffering from which we could save him, he was most grateful and appreciative. The first week in April found him a little more languid than usual, but he sent for his businessmen and lawyers, and quietly, without any hurry and with his usual attention to details, closed up many affairs. With the same calmness he gave direction as to his funeral, ignoring, when possible, any mention of death. On Sunday, the 5th of April, he said to her, whom his loss would leave most lonely, "I want you with me every moment of the little time that is left." On Monday the 6th, he was as usual dressed and on the lounge during 2 or 3 hours of the morning, talking with his trusty agents, Mr. Bowser and Mr. Brothwell. In the afternoon, he received the last of many visits from Dr. A. L. Loomis of New York. In the evening began a slight restlessness, which grew more and more pronounced, and at midnight the heart's action indicated a dangerous condition, and telegrams were sent to all the absent members of the family. At 2 a.m., he spoke of certain business matters, expressed 1 or 2 last wishes, and sang tenderly to his wife, "My last thoughts are of you," sank into a heavy sleep, which lasted until 7 o'clock. While he never fully roused from his lethargy, he showed that he was conscious to the last. At 8 o'clock, when told a gratifying item of election news, he faintly said, "I am glad." At 9, he whispered a few loving words for the comfort of a grieving heart. All that weary day, as his sorrowing children and grandchildren gathered at his bedside, a faint word of tenderness, faint as a breath, fluttered forth to greet each one. Morning wore into afternoon, and afternoon into the dusk of early evening. Death was kind, and no physical pain disturbed the quiet figure on the little bed. Quicker and quicker beat the tired heart, then slower and still slower, and at 6:34, with undaunted heart and unclouded brain, passed out of this place of being which we call life, one of the most remarkable and best-loved men of his country. The news of his death called out a universal expression of sorrow. The leading newspapers of the Old and New World devoted whole pages to a review of his unique career, paying generous tribute to his shrewdness, courage, enterprise, and liberality. Rich and poor, patrician and plebeian, high and low, praised and sorrowed for him. The blotting out of his vivid personality left a gap and a silence in his home and the community of which he had been the life. The city which had owed to him so much of his prosperity, beauty, and reputation, paid him all honor. Public and private buildings were draped with black. Everywhere, draped and flower-wreathed portraits met the eye. Little children, awed and grieved by the death of him who had seemed to their childish admiration immortal, crept wistfully to the darkened house to beg a flower from the funeral wreath that hung on the great oaken doors of Marina. On the day of burial, the 11th of April, a short service in Marina was conducted by Reverend L.B. Fisher, in presence of Mrs. Barnum's family and intimate friends, his partner Mr. Bailey, and many faithful employees, after which the funeral cortege passed through sympathizing throngs to the South Church, the largest in Bridgeport, which yet was inadequate to hold all who wished to pay a last tribute. Mr. Barnum's old and attached friend, Reverend Robert Collier, looked down upon the tear-wet face on the flower-covered casket, delivered an impressive funeral address, while behind him on the platform were gathered all the clergymen of the city, without regard to creed or color. Everything forgotten but the common loss. In accordance with Mr. Barnum's wish, the text, Luke 22-24, "Not my will but thine be done," was the motive of the address, and hymns by Whittier and Holmes, with whose views of life and death he had been in such sympathy, were sung. The honorary pallbearers were Major W.B. Hinks, administrator of the estate, Curtis Thompson, Mr. Barnum's lawyer and confidential adviser, R.B. Lacey, secretary of the Historical Society, Nathaniel Wheeler of the Board of Trade, Isaac Holden, president of the Scientific Society, Postmaster J. W. Knowlton, and Jerome Orcutt of the Universalist Church, Dr. I.D.V. Warner, E. W. Marsh of the Hospital Association, and Bernard Peters of Brooklyn, New York. If there were need of material monuments to keep his name and memory from oblivion, these are not wanting. Among the chief is the magnificent granite museum of natural history, which he built and presented to Tufts College, and which he liberally endowed at his death. A fine bronze statue of himself, a perfect portrait by Thomas Ball, was presented to the city of Bridgeport by his former partners, Jas A. Bailey, Jas L. Hutchinson, and W. W. Cole. This now stands on the superbly sculptured granite pedestal, the gift of the citizens of Bridgeport in the beautiful seaside park, of which he was one of the founders and the largest donor. It is a particularly well-chosen site, his favorite summer day haunt on the margin of the Sound and within sight of his former home. But a better fame is his, for, though the busy hands are folded, the cheery voice stilled, and the kindly smile hid forever, he lives in the love of his devoted family, in the hearts of all who came within the circle of his wonderfully magnetic personality. And it will be long ere the world forgets P.T. Barnum.